Watch what happens to a room when someone truly stops talking. Not the awkward silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the deliberate, composed silence of someone who has plenty to say and chooses not to. Watch the faces. Watch the discomfort ripple outward. Watch how people lean in, fill the space, explain themselves, justify, overshare, ask what's wrong. There is almost nothing that unsettles people more than a person who has mastered silence. Because in a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, the one who says nothing holds a strange and undeniable power, and everyone can feel it, even if no one can name it. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this better than almost any thinker who ever lived. He spent much of his life in silence and solitude, misunderstood, unread, alone with his own mind on mountain paths, while the world ignored him. And out of that silence came some of the most piercing insights into human power, weakness, and self-mastery ever written. He saw what the noise of ordinary life conceals, that most human speech is not strength, but weakness leaking out. That the compulsion to talk, to explain, to justify, to be understood, is very often a symptom of a soul that cannot bear its own company. And he saw the rare opposite, the person who has mastered themselves so completely that they no longer need to fill every silence, no longer need to be understood, no longer need to explain. That person, Nietzsche understood, is quietly one of the most powerful people alive. Today, I'm going to walk you through Nietzsche's philosophy of silence, why saying nothing frightens people, why the compulsion to speak is so often a hidden weakness, and how learning to master your own silence can transform you into someone others cannot read, cannot manipulate, and cannot control. This is not about becoming cold or mute or withdrawn. It's about something far more powerful, reclaiming your words as a source of strength rather than spilling them as a symptom of need. And by the end, you may understand why the most dangerous person in any room is often the quietest one. If you've ever felt the power of a person who says nothing, type "silence is power" in the comments. Let's begin. Let's start by understanding what silence actually is, because most people profoundly misunderstand it. We live in a culture that treats silence as an absence, a void, a failure. Silence is what happens when you have nothing to say, when the conversation dies, when something has gone wrong. We're taught to fill it, to fear it, to rush in and rescue every empty moment with words. And this reflex, this compulsion to fill silence, runs so deep that most people are physically uncomfortable when a silence lasts more than a few seconds. They will say anything, absolutely anything, to make it stop. They'll blurt out their opinions, confess their secrets, agree to things they don't mean, all to escape the unbearable pressure of saying nothing. But Nietzsche would ask you to look at that discomfort more closely, because it reveals something. Why is silence so unbearable? What exactly are people running from when they rush to fill it? The answer, in most cases, is themselves. Silence forces you into contact with your own mind, your own thoughts, your own inner state. And for a person whose inner world is chaotic, empty, or full of things they'd rather not face, that contact is genuinely threatening. So they flee into noise. They fill their lives with talk, with distraction, with the constant chatter of self-expression. Not because they have so much worth saying, but because the alternative, silence, stillness, the confrontation with themselves, is something they cannot tolerate. He who cannot be silent with himself cannot be silent with others. This is the first key. The person who cannot bear silence is very often a person who cannot bear themselves. Their compulsive talking is not a sign of a rich inner life. It's a sign of the opposite. It's the sound of someone running from their own interior, using words the way a frightened person uses light, to keep the darkness at bay. And Nietzsche, who spent years alone with nothing but his own thoughts, understood that the ability to be silent, truly silent, comfortably silent, is a mark of a person who has made peace with their own depths. The one who can sit in silence without flinching is the one who has nothing to run from inside himself. And that is the foundation of a very particular kind of power. Now let's get to the heart of it, the thing the title promises. Why does silence scare people? Why does the composed, deliberate silence of a self-possessed person make others so profoundly uncomfortable? There are several reasons, and each one reveals something deep about human psychology and power. The first reason silence scares people is that it cannot be read, and therefore cannot be controlled. Think about how much of human interaction runs on reading each other, watching faces, listening to words, gauging reactions, using all of that information to predict, influence, and manage the people around us. When someone speaks freely, they hand you a map of their inner world. They tell you what they think, what they fear, what they want, what wounds them. And with that map, you can navigate them, flatter them, persuade them, manipulate them, know exactly which buttons to press. But the silent person gives you no map. They reveal nothing. You cannot tell what they're thinking, what they feel, whether they agree or disagree, whether your words landed or bounced off. And to a mind accustomed to reading and managing others, that opacity is deeply unsettling. The silent person is a locked door, and people fear what they cannot open. The most powerful men have always inspired the historians and philosophers to the greatest silence. Nietzsche understood that power and unreadability are intimately connected. The person who reveals everything makes themselves manageable, predictable, controllable. The person who reveals little becomes a mystery, and mystery commands a strange authority. When people cannot read you, they cannot control you, and on some deep level they know it. Their discomfort in your silence is really the discomfort of encountering something they cannot manage. You've stepped outside the game of mutual reading and managing that most human interaction consists of, and that makes you, to them, faintly dangerous not because you threaten them, but because you're no longer at peace. They can move. The second reason silence scares people is that it forces them to confront themselves. When you don't fill the space, they have to. When you don't react, they're left alone with their own words, their own behavior, their own inner state, and often they don't like what they find there. Have you ever noticed how, when you stay silent after someone says something provocative or manipulative, they often keep talking, and in the process, reveal more than they meant to? Your silence becomes a mirror. Without your reaction to bounce off of, they're thrown back onto themselves, and the truth of what they're doing starts to become visible to them and to everyone watching. This is why manipulators in particular are so disturbed by silence. Their entire method depends on getting a reaction, on you engaging with their game. When you simply say nothing, calmly, their moves land in empty air, and they're left exposed, gesturing at a person who refuses to play. The third reason silence scares people is the most primal. Silence communicates that you don't need their approval. In a world where almost everyone is desperate to be liked, to be understood, to be validated, the person who says nothing, who feels no compulsion to explain, justify, or win others over, radiates a kind of self-sufficiency that most people never achieve. Your silence says, "I don't need to convince you. I don't need you to understand me. I don't need your approval to feel whole." And that self-sufficiency is genuinely intimidating, because it means you cannot be controlled through the usual levers of social approval and disapproval. The person who needs to be liked can be managed by threatening to dislike them. The person who needs to be understood can be managed by withholding understanding. But the silent, self-possessed person has stepped off that entire board. They don't need what everyone else is scrambling for, and that freedom is its own kind of power that others can feel and often fear. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. This is what silence, at its deepest, is really about: owning yourself. The compulsive talker has given a piece of themselves away with every unnecessary word, every over-explanation, every anxious justification, every attempt to be understood and approved of. They've scattered themselves across the reactions of others, But the person who has mastered silence keeps themselves contained, self-possessed, whole. Their words are their own, spent deliberately rather than spilled anxiously. And that self-ownership is the source of the power that others find so unsettling. You cannot own a person who owns themselves. Now let's go deeper into one of Nietzsche's most important insights, because it cuts right to the core of why most people talk too much. Nietzsche was obsessed with the difference between strength and weakness, and he saw that so much of human behavior that appears to be strength is actually weakness in disguise. And nowhere is this truer than with speech. The compulsion to talk, to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to make sure everyone understands you, to win every argument, to always have the last word is very often not strength at all. It's weakness, it's need. It's the soul that cannot rest until it has been validated by others, that cannot act without explaining itself, that cannot bear to be misunderstood even for a moment. Think about the person who over-explains. Someone questions their decision, and they launch into a lengthy justification, marshaling reasons, defending themselves, working desperately to make the other person understand and approve. What does this reveal? It reveals that their sense of the rightness of their own choice is not secure, that they need external agreement to feel okay about what they've done. The truly self-possessed person doesn't over-explain, because they don't need you to approve of their choice. They've made it, they stand behind it, and your understanding is welcome but not required. Their silence in the face of your questioning isn't rudeness, it's a quiet confidence that needs no defense. As Nietzsche understood, the need to constantly justify yourself is a symptom of a self that isn't sure of its own ground. The doer alone learneth. Consider the person who must win every argument, who cannot let a disagreement go, who follows you out of the room still talking, still needing to make their point land. This looks like strength, like conviction, like force. But Nietzsche would see the weakness underneath, the fragile ego that cannot tolerate being wrong, or even being thought wrong, that needs the external victory to prop up an internal insecurity. The genuinely strong person can let an argument go. They can allow someone to walk away thinking they've won because they don't need the win. Their sense of themselves doesn't depend on the other person's agreement. Their silence, their willingness to simply stop, to let it go, to say nothing more, is not defeat. It's a strength so secure it has nothing to prove. This is the great reversal Nietzsche invites you to see. In a world that mistakes noise for strength and silence for weakness, the truth is often the exact opposite. The loudest person in the room, the one who must dominate every conversation, who must be heard, who must explain and justify and win that person, is very often the weakest, driven by a need they cannot control. And the quiet one, the one who watches and listens and speaks rarely, who feels no compulsion to fill the space or win the point, that person is very often the strongest, precisely because they need nothing from the exchange. Silence, properly understood, is not the absence of strength. It is often strength that has become so complete it no longer needs to announce itself. Let me show you what this looks like in the specific arena where it matters most: conflict. Because it's in conflict, in confrontation, in the moments when someone is trying to provoke or manipulate or dominate you, that the power of silence becomes most visible and most useful. When someone attacks you verbally, emotionally, with provocation designed to get a reaction, they are, in a sense, inviting you into a game. The game requires your participation. They provoke, you react, they escalate, you react more, and the whole thing spirals. Your reaction is the fuel. Without it, the fire cannot burn. Is life not 1,000 times too short for us to bore ourselves? Nietzsche had a deep understanding of what he called ressentiment, the festering, reactive resentment that drives so much of human hostility. The person consumed by ressentiment needs a target, needs a reaction, needs to pull you into their bitterness. And the most powerful response to that kind of provocation is very often silence. Not the silence of suppression, of swallowing your anger and seething, but the silence of a person who is genuinely unmoved, who watches the provocation land in empty air and simply declines to pick it up. This silence is devastating to the provoker because it denies them the one thing they need: your engagement. You've refused the game. You've declined to be drawn down to their level, and in doing so, you've demonstrated a self-mastery that they, consumed by their reactivity, can only envy. But I want to be very precise here, because this is where the idea gets misused. The silence of strength is not the silence of suppression. There's an enormous difference. Suppressed silence is when you're boiling inside, desperate to respond, forcing yourself to stay quiet while resentment builds. That's not power, that's just delayed reaction. And it poisons you from within. Exactly the resentment Nietzsche warned against. The silence of strength is different. It's when you're genuinely unmoved, when the provocation truly doesn't reach you, when your silence flows from real inner composure rather than forced restraint. One is a dam holding back a flood. The other is a lake that was never disturbed. The goal is not to suppress your reaction and call it silence. The goal is to become the kind of person whose depths are not so easily stirred, and from that genuine stillness, silence flows naturally. Now, let's talk about the strategic dimension. Because Nietzsche was no naive idealist, he understood power, and he understood that silence is also a source of it in the practical world. The person who speaks less is, quite simply, harder to use against themselves. Every word you say is information you've given away. Every opinion you offer, every reaction you show, every secret you share, every fear you reveal, all of it becomes material that others can use to predict you, influence you, and in the wrong hands, manipulate you. The compulsive sharer hands out this material freely, scattering their inner world across every conversation. And then they wonder why they feel exposed, why people seem to know exactly how to get to them, why they so often feel one step behind. The person who has mastered silence holds their cards close. They listen far more than they speak. They let others reveal themselves while revealing little in return. And this asymmetry is a profound source of advantage. In any interaction, the one who knows more and reveals less holds the stronger position. While others are busy talking, busy displaying their thoughts, their wants, their weaknesses, the silent one is busy learning, watching, understanding. They gather information while giving little away, and when they do finally speak, their words carry weight precisely because they are rare. The person who talks constantly makes their words cheap. Every utterance is worth less because there are so many of them. The person who speaks rarely makes each word valuable. When they finally say something, everyone listens, because they've learned that this person doesn't waste words. They muddy the water to make it seem deep. This is one of Nietzsche's sharpest observations about the difference between the appearance of depth and its reality. Many people talk endlessly, complicate everything, fill the air with words, precisely to seem profound, to seem important, to seem like they have depth, when in fact the talking is a substitute for depth, a muddying of the water to hide how shallow it actually is. The genuinely deep person often has no need to prove it. Their depth shows in the quality of their few words, in the acuity of their attention, in the weight of their silence, not in the volume of their speech. Nietzsche is warning you not to mistake noise for depth, in others or in yourself. The one muddying the water with endless talk is often hiding shallowness. The one who is clear and still and quiet may be the deepest of all. Let me now address something crucial, because this philosophy, like all of Nietzsche's, can be twisted into something ugly, and I won't let it be. The power of silence is not a license to become cold, withholding, contemptuous, or cruel. It is not about treating people with disdain, refusing to communicate out of spite, or using silence as a weapon to punish and control. That kind of silence, the cold shoulder, the punishing withdrawal, the contemptuous refusal to engage, is not strength at all. It's actually its own form of weakness and manipulation, the passive-aggressive cousin of the compulsive talking we've been criticizing. It comes from the same insecure place, a need to control others, just through withholding rather than through noise. The silence Nietzsche points toward is something entirely different, and the distinction matters enormously. It's not silence against people, it's silence that comes from self-possession. It's not withholding communication to punish, it's simply no longer feeling compelled to fill every space, justify every choice, win every argument, or reveal every thought. It's fully compatible with warmth, with connection, with deep and meaningful speech when speech is called for. The self-possessed silent person is not cold. They can be tremendously warm, present, and engaged. They simply speak from strength rather than need, choosing their words deliberately rather than spilling them anxiously. And when they do speak, their warmth is real, precisely because it's not contaminated by neediness. The goal is not to say nothing. The goal is to say only what carries weight, from a place of genuine self-command. One must give value to their existence by behaving as if one's very existence were a work of art. This is the deeper vision. Nietzsche saw the self as something you create, deliberately, like an artist shaping a work of art. And your speech, your silence, is part of that creation. The person who spills words compulsively is not shaping themselves. They're leaking, scattering, dissipating. The person who masters their silence is shaping themselves with intention, choosing what to reveal and what to keep, spending their words like a careful artist spends each stroke. This is not coldness. It's craftsmanship. It's the difference between a life that happens to you and a self that you consciously create. And silence, the mastery of when to speak and when to say nothing, is one of the most powerful tools of that self-creation. Now, let's talk about the connection between silence and self-mastery more broadly, because this is really what the whole thing comes down to. For Nietzsche, the highest human achievement was self-overcoming the mastery of your own impulses, drives, and reactions. The transformation of yourself into someone you have deliberately shaped, rather than someone driven by whatever impulse happens to arise. And the compulsion to speak, to react, to fill silence, is exactly the kind of impulse that the self-mastered person has learned to command. The person who blurts out whatever they think, who reacts to every provocation, who cannot stop themselves from talking, is a person ruled by their impulses. The person who can be silent, who can feel the urge to speak and choose not to, who can be provoked and choose not to react, who can sit in silence and remain composed, has achieved a mastery over themselves that the impulsive talker can only dream of. This is why silence is so much more than a social tactic. It's a discipline of the self. Every time you feel the compulsion to speak and choose, deliberately, to remain silent, you strengthen your command over your own impulses. Every time you feel the urge to justify yourself and choose instead to let your actions stand, you build your inner sovereignty. Every time you're provoked and respond with composed silence rather than reactive noise, you demonstrate to others and, more importantly, to yourself, that you are the master of your reactions rather than their servant. Silence, practiced this way, becomes a training ground for the deepest kind of strength, the strength to command yourself. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. And notice this, the person who has mastered themselves in this way, who has a deep and secure sense of their own purpose and worth, simply doesn't need the constant external validation that drives compulsive speech. They have their why. They know who they are and what they're about. And because of that inner security, they can bear the silence, bear being misunderstood, bear not winning the argument, bear not being validated, because none of those external things determine their sense of themselves. The compulsive talker needs constant external input to feel okay. The self-mastered person has an internal source, and so they can be silent, can be still, can say nothing, and remain completely whole. Their silence flows from their strength, and their strength flows from their self-mastery, and their self-mastery flows from having become someone they deliberately created, rather than someone driven by need. So how do you actually develop this? How do you move from being someone who fills every silence to someone who commands it? Nietzsche's philosophy points toward a real path, and I want to give it to you clearly and practically. The first practice is to become comfortable with silence itself, to stop fleeing it. Start noticing your own discomfort in silence, and rather than rushing to fill it, sit with it. In conversations, Let silences last a beat longer than feels comfortable, without leaping in to rescue them. When you're alone, practice being with your own thoughts without immediately reaching for distraction. The goal is to build your tolerance for silence, to make peace with it, until it no longer feels like a threat to escape, but a space you can inhabit with ease. Remember Nietzsche's insight: the one who can be silent with himself can be silent with others. So, begin with yourself. Learn to sit in your own company, in stillness, without flinching. That comfort with silence is the foundation everything else is built on, because a person who is comfortable in silence can never be pressured into filling it. The second practice is to speak less and listen more deliberately. In your next several conversations, experiment with saying significantly less than you normally would. Ask questions instead of offering opinions. Let others talk while you listen. Resist the urge to jump in, to add your point, to share your reaction, to win the exchange. Notice how much you learn when you're not busy talking. Notice how others reveal themselves when given the space. Notice, too, how your restraint affects the dynamic, how your calm, attentive silence gives you a kind of presence that constant talking never could. You'll likely find that people are drawn to a good listener, that your fewer words carry more weight, and that you feel more composed and self-possessed when you're not scattering yourself across every conversation. This is the asymmetry Nietzsche understood. Reveal less, learn more, and grow stronger in every exchange. The third practice is to stop explaining and justifying yourself. This is one of the hardest and most transformative. The next time you make a decision and someone questions it, resist the compulsion to launch into a lengthy defense. Notice the urge to justify, to make them understand, to win their approval, and choose instead to let your decision stand with minimal explanation or none at all. This is my choice. Full stop. You'll feel the discomfort of not being understood, of not being approved of, and that discomfort is exactly the weakness you're training yourself out of. Each time you resist the urge to over-explain, you strengthen your inner security, your sense that your choices are valid because you have made them, not because others have approved them. The person who no longer needs to justify themselves has reclaimed an enormous amount of power that most people give away every single day. You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. Let that be your quiet stance when others demand you justify yourself. You have your way. You needn't defend it, explain it, or win agreement for it. Your silence in the face of their demand for justification is not evasion. It's the calm sovereignty of a person who doesn't require external validation to stand behind their own choices. The fourth practice is to master silence in conflict and provocation. This is the advanced discipline, and it takes time. The next time someone tries to provoke you, to draw you into an argument, to get a reaction pause, feel the impulse to react and choose, deliberately, not to. Respond with calm silence, or with very few measured words. Deny the provocation the fuel it needs. But, and this is essential, make sure your silence flows from genuine composure, not suppression. If you're seething inside while forcing yourself to stay quiet, you haven't mastered anything. You've just built a dam. The deeper work is to become the kind of person whose composure is real, whose depths aren't so easily stirred, so that your silence in conflict is the natural expression of a mind that simply wasn't disturbed. Work toward that genuine stillness, and your silence in the face of provocation will become one of the most powerful forces you possess. And the fifth practice, underlying all the others, is to build the inner self-sufficiency from which real silence flows. Remember, the compulsion to speak, to explain, to be validated comes from needing something external to feel whole. So the deepest work is to build a self that doesn't need those things, that has its own sense of purpose, its own secure sense of worth, its own internal source of okayness. Invest in your own growth, your own understanding, your own becoming. Develop a rich inner life so that silence becomes a space you can inhabit richly rather than a void you need to flee. As your inner security grows, The compulsion to fill every silence, win every argument, and secure everyone's approval will naturally fade, not because you're suppressing it, but because you no longer need what it was chasing. This is the real foundation, a self so complete that silence is comfortable, because there's nothing missing that noise was trying to fill. Here is what Nietzsche ultimately understood, and what I want you to carry out of all of this. The world is full of noise. Everyone is talking, explaining, justifying, reacting, desperate to be heard and understood and approved of. And in the midst of all that noise, the person who has mastered silence stands apart, self-possessed, unreadable, unmoved, powerful, in a way that the noisemakers can feel but cannot match. Their silence is not emptiness, it's fullness. It's not the absence of something to say, it's the presence of a self so complete that it no longer needs to prove itself through endless speech. It's the strength that has become so secure, it no longer needs to announce itself. And the reason this silence scares people is that it reveals by contrast the weakness in their own noise. When they encounter someone who doesn't need to fill the space, doesn't need to explain, doesn't need to win, doesn't need to be understood or approved of, they're confronted with everything they themselves are still chasing. The silent person's self-sufficiency exposes the neediness beneath everyone else's chatter. That's why the discomfort is so deep. It's not really fear of you. It's the uncomfortable recognition of what your silence reveals about their own noise, the endless talking that was always underneath, a symptom of a self that couldn't bear its own company. So the invitation Nietzsche extends is not to become cold or mute or contemptuous. It's to become sovereign, to reclaim your words as a source of strength rather than a symptom of need, to master the impulse to fill every silence, to build a self so complete that stillness is comfortable and speech is deliberate. It's to stop scattering yourself across every conversation and start containing yourself, shaping yourself, owning yourself. And in doing so, to become that rare and powerful presence. The person who says little, reveals less, needs nothing from the exchange, and holds, in their composed silence, a strength that all the noise in the world cannot touch. Because in the end, the silence that scares them is not really about them at all. It's about you, about the self-mastery you've achieved, the self-sufficiency you've built, the sovereignty you've reclaimed over your own words and reactions and inner life. Their fear is just the echo of your strength. And the more completely you master your silence, the more completely you'll have mastered yourself, which was, Nietzsche would tell you, the only real power there ever was. So I'll leave you with the only question that matters. Will you keep filling every silence with the noise of a self that's still chasing approval, or will you master your silence, reclaim your words, and become someone whose stillness holds more power than others' noise ever could? If your answer is the second one, drop "My silence is my strength" in the comments right now. Speak it into existence, or better yet, hold it in silence and let it become true. Because the loudest person in the room is so often the weakest, and the one who has learned the power of saying nothing composed, self-possessed, needing nothing, is so often the strongest. The world will never stop trying to pull you into its noise. Your power begins the moment you no longer need to answer.